Finally, Clemson Sports Talk has come back to Drive Time. Hello, everybody. Lawton Swan back in the saddle once again. It is the show that shakes the Southland. Clemson Sports Talk for you each and every afternoon as you make your way around the great state of South Carolina and beyond, listening to us on incredible radio stations like Fox Sports Radio 1400, the Midlands, heard around the world on the iHeart Radio application. Download today. It is free. The website, put the .com on it. Doggone it, that's ClemsonSportsTalk.com, 803-450-0086. All right, coming up today, Luke Winstall going to be on the program. Former Clemson Tiger head coach Tommy Bowden joins us. I'm starting to think that not having Coach Bowden on last Friday may have been the jinx. May have been the jinx. You know, the last time Clemson lost at Duke, Tommy Bowden was the head coach back in 2004. Maybe, had we had him on last Friday, which we've had him on for a decade. But I'll be honest with you, I wasn't sure about how the hurricane that had come through the Florida, region, how that affected him. And I didn't want to bother him. Monday game. I mean, it was a weird week, right? I've been on multiple radio shows this week to dissect and to dive into Clemson's loss to Duke 28-7. And every show I want to say, well, it's hard to believe what you saw on Saturday. Well, it would be, but it was Monday. But those are in the rear view, and we look forward now to tomorrow's matchup against Charleston Southern in Death Valley. And joining us now from the classic city of Athens, Georgia, he is Luke Winstall. Luke, what's up, big guy? Welcome in, man. How are you?
Thank you. Doing great, Lawton. Appreciate you having me on. How are you?
Man, I'm good. Happy Friday. A little college football looming. I mean, big games all across the country. We could certainly talk about that, but I want to ask you just a little bit about what you saw during Clemson's loss to the Duke Blue Devils. Man, what a shocking result.
No doubt about it. It was one of those where I said, okay, things are at halftime going all right. It's not a clean game, but second half, I was sitting there and I kept waiting for the real Clemson to show up. I kept waiting for the Cade Klubnik we saw, Lawton sitting next to each other in Charlotte last year when he comes in and throws 3 straight touchdown passes and we're looking at each other like, there's a future. Yeah, I remember that's one of those moments from last year that I don't think I'll ever forget. And I was waiting for that to happen. I'm sitting there looking at the game. I'm waiting for the moment where I can look over at somebody and say, that's the team that we had talked about for the past month, building up and writing these articles and writing these preview stories of there it is. And we almost had those moments on the goal line a few times and in the red zone. And the second half, I mean, I'm sure you've mentioned this, but no points and no punts, and you somehow have that happen on 6 drives and a half. And when I was looking to write that article at the end of the game, the kind of sidebar column type of story that we did, the learned, loved, loathed, and looking at that, I had to sit there for about 15 minutes and say, okay, I know what I just saw, but how do I digest that? Where do I go? And I sat there and I was like, it's a little bit of a state of shock, and it's nothing like I'm sure what the team was experiencing, but it was something that I think a lot of the fans can relate to. Of you sit there and you're like, what did I just see? Like a minute 41 to go, the Duke students are in the back of the end zone ready to run on the field. Like, who would have thought that was even possible? So after, putting some thoughts together, that's kind of where we went with it. And the biggest thing to me is, hey, talent acquisition, there's been some misses, and I understand you're going to miss in recruiting. You're going to have guys that transfer, but now when you have, near 10 guys that transferred out last year, and some of those were highly rated players, some of those may not have totally been missed evaluations, looking at a couple that played last week, DJ, and then one of the linebackers that went to Colorado and got playing time immediately. You look at those and you say, and you didn't replace that with anybody except some guys that are fresh out of high school. And that's fine long-term. I get it for strategy. But when you look at, you needed help now at certain positions. And there had been some concern of had wide receiver been addressed. I know that's something that's been talked about a lot this week, but there's still a ways to go in that room. And there's some players that were on the field that I said, I don't really know how they belong as a player getting so many snaps at Clemson. And seeing that.
Audrey wrote us, and she said, why are our quarterbacks seeming to have confidence problems? Is it because of the wide receivers? So I'll ask you, I mean, you're a big recruiting guy. You knew all of these guys when they were coming out of high school. I mean, what is it at this point in your mind? I mean, is a big part of the issue that Clemson's seeing, Luke? I mean, is that just confidence of the quarterback because of maybe a lack of a playmaker, so to speak, or a guy that can just go up and take that 80, that 80-20 ball and turn it into a 50-50 play.
I think this is something that going forward, one of the storylines I told you a lot, and we called last week, and I said, here's a couple of things I'm watching. I was watching left tackle, and I was watching freshman immediate impact of who would do that. Now going forward, I want to watch, is Stool going to get more involved at tight end, but also who's going to be Cade's number one target? Who's that receiver that's going to really grow on him? And there were a couple of ideas, but I think right now, unless you're really somebody that is inside that program, like a member of the team, I don't think we have a great idea of who his number one is. Maybe it's Williams, maybe it's Collins, maybe it is another player that finds their way into the picture. But I'll be interested to see who's the number one. And right now, Clemson doesn't have that elite threat. I think Bryant Wesco in the 24 class, as long as he stays committed and signs on, which still sounds like a pretty sure thing at this point, but he's one of those that comes in and you say that's the number one target type of player. But right now, I don't see that on this team, and I think that does contribute to, for Cade, it seems like there's a little hesitation. The pocket presence is something that I know a lot of people have mentioned, and I think it comes from the fact that you can't be like Joe Burrow and say, oh, Jamar Chase is down there somewhere, like he's going to go get it for me. I don't think there is that level of confidence with the receivers for Caden. I think that can be a bit of an issue for a young quarterback.
Well, and I watched a YouTube video that was kind of breaking down some of Clemson's offensive woes, and a lot of it pointed to Brenningstool. And Brenningstool's, well, some of it was his blocking, the other was his route running. And, I do kind of wonder, looking at Clemson right now, that tight end spot, not saying that it's not Jake Brenningstool's by any means, but can he get his game up to the level where they might need it in order to increase the confidence for Cade Klubnik? Josh chimes into the program, checking out. He says, hey, man, look, Chad Morris's offense started out slow. His second game, we almost lost to Wofford. And then the next game, we took out the defending national champions in Auburn. All that's true. That was a 35-27 game back September the 10th, 2011. And then they beat Auburn the next game. And I remember that's the quote where Dabo Swinney came out and said, I can't think of a better place for the street to get snapped than Death Valley, South Carolina, baby. So, I mean, would you say that it's fair that, that was just game one under Garrett Riley? And look, on all these shows I've gone on this week, people have asked me, do I still think this team can contend for a national title? Can they get back in the mix? It's way too early to say they're out, right? If you run the table and win the Atlantic Coast Conference and your one loss is Duke and you shot yourself in the foot as many times as Clemson did, that's a forgivable loss. The thing that you can't do is lose that game and say week 9 or 10 and maybe hope to get back in. But I'll ask you, how much of the hiccups were just, Luke, in your opinion, on the fact that this is a brand new offense, so to speak, with Garrett Riley taking over?
This is one thing that we wrote about as well. I'd mentioned, I think a lot of people, including myself, expected more immediate success out of this offensive look. And I think understanding in the moment, it's shocking. Even in a day or two after, it's a shocking, how do we come to terms with what just happened? And once you get past that, I think personally, it took me about a day to kind of be like, wait, this is not, some kind of existential crisis here. This is something that, yes, this was bad. And yes, there are issues and there are plenty of problems. And there are things we can point to have these problems not come up in the future, like what we said with talent acquisition. But through this, I mean, there's still plenty of time in the season. With it being just game one, think about historically, it's a lot easier to overcome in the eyes of a playoff committee an early loss rather than a late loss. And looking at that for Clemson, it's okay. You still control your own destiny. And the biggest thing that helps too, I think, is this schedule has the strength of, if Clemson goes and beats FSU, beats Notre Dame, beats UNC, beats South Carolina, some of those maybe games that we might circle in red on our calendar, people can't really doubt Clemson. That's enough to prove yourself. That's enough to say, okay, week one, everything was new, maybe weren't prepared the way that the team should have been, and you move on. So because of the strength of schedule, in my eyes, that's the thing that this team's going to be tested. If they can prove themselves in the future and play with that level of competition in the way that their roster is built to. I mean, there's positions where there's more gaps than maybe there should be, but most of the positions on this roster are solid. There's a good bit of depth. It's a top 5 to top 7 roster in college football. There's no reason that they can't compete here, that they can't turn things around. So it's one coming in. You've got this period with the couple of games, Charleston Southern, Florida Atlantic, and then the week leading into Florida State. There's time to correct things, even if they're just the small details that would get you a win over Duke if you'd done them correctly. So those kinds of things to me are very much able to be in the cards for Clemson.
Yeah, we had nearly 150 comments. By the way, follow Luke on Twitter at Luke Winstall, covers recruiting for us, does an incredible job. I'm sure he'll be out at some high school football games tonight. We'll hear about that in a minute. But Dabo Swinney was asked about that roster construction question, and we kind of posed, that follow-up to people, what are their thoughts on it, because he says it didn't have anything to do with us getting beat by Duke. And I agree. Like the facets that Clemson lost that game weren't about their inability to move the ball. It all came down to some fundamental mistakes that they made that are correctable. And that's where I think in this side of the business, I go, okay, I'm not pressing the panic button where fans like to press it. I say, you know what? You roll out there, you see what happens in a few weeks against Florida State, and then you get walloped by Florida State. You go, well, looks like this team isn't quite constructed the way that we once thought. You go out there and beat Florida State. It's a complete reset. Move forward with the season to see where you go. All right, Luke, some more questions. Josh says, hey, Luke, has the defense taken a step back? Are they a slow defense in the secondary? And what about the defensive line getting no sacks? I'm worried about a shootout a la FSU.
Yeah, thank you for the question there. So loaded a few things into that one. So when you look at the defensive construction here, first off, I like the freshmen. It was 22 snaps each, I think, for Peter Woods and Tamarion Parker. Both of them, if you look at some of the PFF numbers, graded out well. And
I can't get used to calling him TJ Parker. And I just can't.
No. Yeah, it's going to take me a while. I'm sorry.
I don't like it either, but yeah.
Hey, if he likes it, I'll learn it. But I'm just so used to, in recruiting, it's kind of funny, all these guys, or a lot of the top guys, have nicknames and stuff, and I'll go out there and kind of go with the government name, and I've always been that guy. And for TJ, we'll call him, he came out and he proved more than I kind of expected for a first impression. I thought he'd get, in here and there, but I look at him and I say, shoot, how long until he's a starter? I mean, that seems like one of those that he's going to press at his position. So I liked that. Some of the immediate impact we saw was good. And then let's see, Lawton, the rest of that question there, we talked about.
Oh, sorry.
That was a multi-parter, I think. Are they a slow defense? I think it's hard to tell. Barrett Carter mentioned the linebacker group is interesting. I was talking with Tyrese a little while ago, who also works on the site. And we were kind of breaking it down of the linebacker group looked a little slower than I thought they would. And Barrett Carter talked about in the press conference, I know a lot of people got on him about it. I'm not, about to, fire any shots or anything. I just think that as the season goes on, those types of things stop being an issue. I think Barrett and Jeremiah Trotter have most of the bulk of the snaps on them, and they know that because there's not a lot of depth in that linebacker group. And that's something that Clemson has to address in recruiting. Same thing for Wade Woodaz, getting close to 30 snaps. Like, those are your guys. There's not a whole lot behind them, and what is behind them, we don't know what we're looking at yet as we evaluate this program. So looking at some of those things of, hey, those guys have got to know that the load's on them. They'll get into better shape as they go. The defensive line seems to be able to rotate, so not as much worried about the speed there. And then defensive backs, that was one group that, to me, I think there's a ton of potential in terms of talent. There's some guys that we look at, Makuba, Wiggins, those could be draft picks. Mickens should be a draft pick and a Senior Bowl type of player. So seeing them come together, I feel like that secondary hasn't meshed yet. I didn't feel like we saw a great group at all times there in the secondary.
Luke, we won't answer this next question right now, but this will give you an idea of how big that Clemson South Carolina rivalry is, because Kyle writes in and says, are we going to beat USC? He just wants to just cut to November. What's going to happen in Williams-Brice Stadium? Kyle, man, appreciate the question. We'll definitely talk about that one as we roll along. The Gamecocks might have their hands full this weekend against a really good Furman team. I know South Carolina's only favored by about 24 points, but that's a good Furman squad, and I'm intrigued by the new clock rules. I still think that that's going to give some opponents opportunities against bigger programs to shorten the game, minimize possessions. And if you can capitalize on a couple of mistakes, you can make it a close one. I'm not calling for an upset for Furman to beat South Carolina, but I know this: the Gamecock offensive line better play better than they did against North Carolina, because my goodness, there were some gaping holes.
Yeah, and I looked at that game. I said, "Wow, either UNC's defense is really good or South Carolina's offensive line is really bad." And I said, I'm gonna have to settle somewhere in the middle here, and
Yeah.
just give some props to UNC and just say South Carolina. If they don't have that done, that could be a game where maybe TJ Parker does come out and say, "Hey, I'm the man," or Peter Woods says, "Hey, this is a game that fans are going to remember me for." Because otherwise, even with those two being freshmen, I didn't see people on that South Carolina offensive line yet that could come out and defend like that. And I also look at, they need that 24 class, the offensive linemen, to get in there now. I mean, Cam Pringle and Josiah Thompson and Blake Franks, that big three in-state guys that a lot of the high school football fans around South Carolina have gotten to know. Those are highly rated players. They're going to the Gamecocks. That program, they need them bad, because that O-line, they've got to get that infusion, and they'll have it coming if they keep those guys committed and signed.
All right, Luke. So give us a rundown, man. He's on Twitter at Luke Winstall. You want to follow him? I'm sure there'll probably be a photo gallery by tomorrow morning. Give us the scoop. Where are you going to be tonight? What game you watching? Who's the big player?
Yeah, it's about time we go and check in on Champ Thompson. He is transferred from Meadow Creek to Gainesville. I know, Clemson fans know Gainesville from Deshaun Watson. People in Georgia know Gainesville. Of course, it's a competitive program for decades now. They'd had a little lull, but they've come back because now they've got Coach Niblett over from Alabama, won a bunch of state championships over there. So some of those Clemson players now that are from Alabama are familiar with Niblett's work, and he's got quite the reputation. He's a coach that has made headlines from being paid in six figures to coach high school football. So if that tells you the magnitude of the program and the college prep that he runs, he's brought in transfers, and it's not just guys that are hoping to get to the collegiate level. It's a guy like Champ Thompson that was already committed to Clemson and was already had these offers, but came over and they made the move and everything, legal and done correctly. And he's over there for the college prep experience that he's getting. They're over there, hey, this program's going to get you ready for Clemson, and it's going to get you ready to jump in early. So it's something that I'm interested to see where his development is. His father played for the Atlanta Falcons, Michael Thompson. So those kinds of things are interesting. I've seen him here and there, but never gotten to see him play a game. And he's a four-star, generally consensus four-star player on the D-line. It was Nick Eason's first get in the 2024 class at that position before Heaven Brown-Schuler jumped in as the second defensive lineman. So both of those guys are not too far away from the Metro Atlanta area. Heaven's in the Metro Atlanta area, and Easton's pulling more and more out of Georgia. So, being in the area, he'll be playing Clark Central. So Gainesville's number one in the 6A classification, second highest. Clark Central is in 5A, the class below that, and they're a top 10 team as well. So it should be a good test of competition. We're expecting Thompson to be doubled, sometimes maybe even triple teamed. It's very disruptive. So we'll see, what we get in terms of highlights, but it sounds like opposing teams so far have just tried to take him out of the game and let everyone else handle it. So we'll see what Champ's able to do and, see how impressive he can be.
Well, follow Luke on Twitter at Luke Winstall. Luke, buddy, always appreciate you joining us on a Friday afternoon, my man.
Awesome. Thank you for having me on, and looking forward to tomorrow.
Yeah, he'll be in Death Valley, so enjoy that. Probably taking photos and doing it all. He's Luke Winstall, folks. Go follow him. Again, as he joins us every Friday afternoon. Don't forget, coming up in hour 2, we'll have Tommy Bowden. For those of you watching the live stream, we're going to pull away from a few minutes. We'll come back, though, with a second stream with Tommy Bowden on the show. Again, former Clemson Tiger head coach. So quick break. We'll come back with more right here on Fox Sports Radio 1400 The Midlands and around the world on the iHeart Radio application.